So thank you all for being here today. We're going to be talking about the legislative process in South Carolina. Yesterday in our advocacy boot camp, we covered how to be an effective advocate, talking about the really the basics at an individual and organizational level on how to prepare yourself to be an effective advocate in the nonprofit sector. Covered a little bit about nonprofit advocacy versus lobbying, and all of those steps on how to be an effective advocate. That will be available also on our website in the coming days and weeks as we build out a new advocacy library, as will this one. This one is a little bit more technical, a little bit more C-SPAN, as I like to say. We're going to get into the weeds a little bit on how on the legislative process in South Carolina, how laws are made, and a little bit about how it's structured. If you're new to advocacy or your organization is new to advocacy, this is perfect for you. If you've been involved before, this hopefully is a good refresher as we're in the off season, quote unquote, as our legislature is out. And if you are experienced in this and we get towards the end and there are some questions, feel free to chime in with your experience in this. And towards the end, also, we do have some questions to ask y'all in the chat or otherwise to think through as well. So be prepared to type or come off mute towards the end and participate. So my name is GP McLear. I'm the Director of Public Policy and Community Engagement Together SC. I believe all of our team are also on the call today. Karen, Ben, Destiny, Desmond, and Brooke. Advocacy is really important to our organization. We do it on behalf of the sector, but it's also important for us to help build the capacity of our members of over almost 1,000 members across the state. And that's part of what this advocacy bootcamp is about. Before I forget, tomorrow is our panel discussion, activating those you serve. It'll start at 11:15 with 3 great members, one a lobbying firm and then 2 nonprofit members about how they engage those that they serve every day in their advocacy work. So really good conversation coming up tomorrow. So I hope you can join in for that one as well. That one will not be recorded. So if you're able to make it, we look forward to seeing you there. So let's dive into the legislative process in South Carolina. This can be challenging for a lot of people to learn right off the bat, especially if you're thrown into the fire on the legislative process. So we're going to try to break it down for you, and hopefully this is a good resource you can refer back to or reach out to us if you have specific questions. I'm going to talk a little bit about the legislature in general in South Carolina and our state house in Columbia, and then talk about the process itself, the legislative process. We'll end with a couple kind of tips and tricks as well to track things or to monitor things and how to approach this work. So please ask questions in the chat and we'll get to them towards the end of today's session. So I'm going to start big picture at the State House. One of our favorite things to do is take people to the State House every year, whether it's at our summit, if it's in Columbia, or during a State House Day, which this year will be in April. Sorry, this fiscal year will be in April. It's a great opportunity for folks to see the State House. A lot of folks maybe haven't been since either their kids' field trip or their own personal field trip to the State House. And so we love breaking that down for folks. And the same way, we want to talk about who's in the State House. So our state legislature is a bicameral body with a House of Representatives and a Senate. There are 124 House members, 124 districts, single member districts across the state. So you vote for your representative, and if your family lives across the street in a different district, they vote for their representative. There are 124 of those. Every 10 years, they're reapportioned, as well as the Senate after the census and redistricting. There are still 124. The size of those districts, though, tend to grow with the population. They're about equal across the board. The Senate, meanwhile, has 46 members. At one time, there was one senator for every county, but as we got into how redistricting impacted South Carolina and how that grew over time, those are not necessarily the case. Many senators cover many counties based on population density, but there are 46 senators, and they have 4-year terms. All of these elections occur on even years. In 2024, every South Carolina senator and every South Carolina House of Representative member was up for re-election, for instance. That's 170 legislators were up. In 2026, it'll just be House members that will be up. So kind of hard to keep track sometimes, but just know that on even years, not only are you voting for federal, but you're also voting for state level every time. Um, so we also, though, have a couple other constitutional officers. These are statewide elected. All of us vote for these folks. And you can see that full list there. I think there's 9 of them. Obviously, at the top of the list, the governor, who's on a joint ticket with the lieutenant governor now, are elected every 4 years on the same term cycle as well. That 4-year term cycle will be in 2026. So all of those folks you'll see on the ballot in 2026 as well. Of course, we know we have a growing list of candidates for the governor's race right now. We've seen a couple folks throw in their names in the ring for attorney general and commissioner of agriculture, for instance. So we will have some contested races. Those filings happen in the spring. But we have over 170 elected officials serving us in Columbia. You have not only all of the constitutional officers, but you have 1 senator. And you also have 1 House member. The session itself, they go to Columbia January through May. All the House and Senate convene at the same time. They may have different schedules within that time period based on the day, but they are all in from January to May plus. And we'll get to that in a second. But by law, their first day is the second Tuesday in January. And by law, their last day is the second Thursday in May of their regular session. All of their work has to take place between those dates. It's the second Thursday in May is called sine die. That's means it's the last day. It's Latin, and it's the last day of session at 5 p.m. under law. They meet Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of those weeks from January to May. 3 days a week. That's when they're down there. So when you think about the legislature, it's a part-time legislature. These are not their full-time jobs. Many of them are employers themselves, have their own businesses, or work for companies that obviously allow that flexibility for them to come down. The commitment is, though, for 3 days a week from January to May at least. And so when we think about legislators, they're not like congressmen or congresswomen. They have to go back home. They're working jobs, or maybe they're retired, but this is a part-time gig for them. Of course, the workload is pretty much year-round. They sometimes have, almost always have a special session in June to come back and really, and the highlight for them is really the budget. The budget has to pass by June 30th of each year. And so they usually come back in June for a couple weeks to hash out the final version of the state's budget and vote on governor vetoes. We'll get to that process in a little bit. That happens almost every year. They can come back. The governor and or the House, the Speaker of the House and the Senate President can all call the legislature back for something. We saw that happen a couple times throughout the last few years. When they came back in November to deal with CARES Act funding, for instance, during COVID. So they can come back otherwise, but for all intents and purposes, you're looking at January through June every year that the State House is active. What's important to note here is it's a 2-year cycle. Because when we get to the legislative process in a second, bills can only live for that during that 2-year cycle. So a cycle begins after an election. So after the House election, the House is every 2 years. So after good barometer, every time you vote for a House member, that's the start of a new 2-year cycle. Bills have to be passed within that 2-year cycle, or otherwise they go away. Clean slate every 2 years. So if your bill is introduced in January of year 1, it has until May of year 2 to pass. If your bill is introduced in May of year 2, it has until the second Thursday in May. It has 2 weeks essentially to pass. So that's the count. That when you think about a bill, whether it gets carried, it doesn't happen in a session, but if there's another year left, it's still alive until the end of that 2-year cycle. Congress is actually the same way as well. We'll zoom in a little bit on the House of Representatives. Like I said, the House has 124 members. Right now, the partisan makeup of that body is 88 Republicans and 36 Democrats. That is a super majority in the House, meaning there's over 2/3. Over 2/3 of those in the House are in the Republican Party. And that's important for vetoes, which we'll get to later. Like I said, that is the ability to override a veto. So that's a lot of power. It also meets a lot of thresholds for internal rules in the House to overcome certain legislative obstacles potentially. There are 13 standing committees. They're all available on the website. You can look at them. They all have a chairperson, and then there's each of them have subcommittees, which have their own chairs as well. But there's 13 standing committees, and House members always serve on a committee, if not multiple committees. There are a couple key leadership positions that you'll want to know in the House. The Speaker of the House actually carries a lot of power within his body in terms of where bills are, what committees bills are directed to. We'll talk about in a little bit. He appoints committees, and he assigns every member to committees, and it has a lot of sway in how the body operates. The Speaker Pro Tem, current Speaker of the House is Representative Merle Smith from Sumter. He was the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee before becoming Speaker. The Speaker Pro Tem is Representative Tommy Pope from York County. He's been a long time Speaker Pro Tem. He's the individual that will take over for the Speaker and presiding over the House on a lot of occasions. And so you'll see Representative Pope a lot if you watch the State House feeds. The Majority Leader is Davey Hyatt out of the Coney Pickens area. He is the Majority Leader for the Republican Party in the House. He is leaving after this term. He'll be leaving in 2026, but he's the Majority Leader. Obviously leader of the party, and since they have a very large majority, it carries a significant weight in what bills are going to be fast-tracked and whatnot. The minority leaders represent Todd Rutherford from Columbia area, longtime minority leader for the House Democratic Party, with a shrinking party in terms of numbers on the House side. It's harder for them to sometimes change the trajectory of things, although minority does carry weight in terms of appointments to various committees, or particularly conference committees, as well as other boards and commissions and things like that, and helps lead that party. And then also perhaps the next most in terms of, I guess you could call it, power in the House is the chair of Ways and Means, which right now is Representative Bruce Bannister in Greenville. That is the Budget Writing Committee. So a lot of sway, not just budget, anything related to funding. So that's also taxes. That's obviously the state budget, and a lot of other areas in state law are governed by the Ways and Means Committee. So obviously carries a lot of weight. All chairs of committees carry a significant amount of weight, but the chair of Ways and Means is usually the one that can move the needle a lot on various items. The Senate, on the other hand, is much smaller, 46 members, and that's it. If you ever visit the State House and you visit the House first and then you go to the Senate, it is a lot smaller. There are 46 members of the Senate. There are 34 Republicans and 12 Democrats. That Republican majority has increased in the last election. They also now have a supermajority. Same philosophy. It impacts the ability to override vetoes, but also in terms of internal rules for the Senate, there's a lot more ability to impact the process on the floor with that many in one party. They have slightly more standing committees. They have 15 standing committees. Senators serve on multiple committees because there's only 46 of them. They serve on a lot of committees. And so they tend to stay really busy. They also, of course, their districts have more constituents within them. And so they stay very busy. There are some key leadership positions here. The president of the Senate is Senator oh my gosh, Senator Alexander from Walhalla. President Alexander, he is this is a newer position created when the lieutenant governor became a joint candidate with the governor, a joint ticket. The lieutenant governor used to serve as the president of the Senate, and so that is no longer the case. So this was a new position created, and Senator Alexander is the current president. Senator Harvey Peeler was a former president, but he relinquished that to become chair of the Finance Committee, also on this list. Majority leader is Senator Shane Massey from Edgefield. The majority leader carries a lot of weight in the Senate, more so than in the House side, particularly on the floor. They tend to have a lot of say in what's going to be debated on the floor, structure of that debate, how long they're going to debate on things. You will see Senator Massey always sort of give remarks to the body on how the day is going to go, or what the next day will look like. They carry a lot more weight. There's also Senate Minority Leader Brad Hutto from Orangeburg on the Democratic side. They tend to have the ability to have a little bit more influence on the process in the Senate, just because there's less of them in general. And then, of course, the chair of the Finance Committee on the Senate is an extremely powerful position as well. Budget, taxes, all of that, similar to the House side. The one thing I will note on this, every senator actually could be on this list for key leadership positions, because in the South Carolina Senate, one senator can place an objection on a bill and prevent it from coming up for debate. And so any senator can stop a bill, and by virtue of them releasing their name, also release a bill. If they remove their name, then it can come back up. So every senator has a fair amount of sway in their body. But in terms of where power may lie in the Senate, these are the four positions that can move the needle very fast. All right, we're going to dive into then how all of this works. Now that you know sort of a landscape of who's where and how why it's important in the different bodies, we're going to go into the legislative process. I will say what I'm going to do here is assume that everything is the bill that we're going to talk about, a pretend bill, is going to start in the House side, because I think otherwise I might accidentally confuse everybody. So we're going to start on the House side. So a bill is first introduced, and a bill can only be introduced by a legislator. I put it in quotations because you can work with a legislator to help draft a bill. Many of our what I would call 301 or 501 organizations in our membership who do a lot of advocacy work do a lot of bill crafting. So a legislator, though, has to be the one to actually file a bill. But you can work with a legislator on that text, and they will usually also have staff of various committees actually write the language many times. And so, but the idea and the text and the movement has to come from a legislator. It is submitted to the House clerk. And at which point it's filed. And what you will see in December, you may remember I said that they start in January. In December, though, they do open the door on bills to be pre-filed. So that means if you've been working on an idea in the off session and you want to go ahead and get that bill in the queue, it helps alleviate a lot of pressure in January, of procedural pressure to get things through and assigned to a committee and things like that. So you can do that in December. There's a couple of dates that the House and Senate allow for bills to be pre-filed. So assume that your bill, whatever you're passionate about, has been filed or is drafted by a legislator. It's submitted to the clerk. The clerk then, if this is during a regular day and the bill is on their desk, they pick it up and they will do bill introductions as a section of the day. And they will say a bill by Representative blank and they'll kind of start reading a summary. The Speaker of the House then assigns that to a committee. This process is called being read. So you'll hear this if you're following your city council or county council. You'll also hear this obviously at the state. A bill being read or a law being read is akin to it being voted on. So at a city council, for instance, if you have a zoning ordinance, it requires 2 readings. That's 2 votes. A bill has to be read 3 times in the House and the Senate. The first time it's quote unquote read, it's actually introduced and the speaker assigns it to a committee. And that all happens very fast. There's no real action that occurs other than the clerk calling the bill, and the speaker, which could be the speaker pro tem if they are presiding, or another presiding officer, assigns it to a committee. Here's one difference between the House and the Senate, though. The speaker on the House side has a lot of leeway into assigning bills to committees. It does not necessarily have to be an exact alignment with that committee's jurisdiction, although it does need to have a fair amount of alignment. They have a lot of leeway in where things go. So if you have a bill that would assign a new fee on someone who's been arrested and going to a detention center, that's both judiciary and ways and means. There's money and there's the judicial process. They may choose which one it can go to. This can become a really powerful tool based on who's in different committees and what the speaker would like to see done with this bill. So that's a lens to keep in mind. But the speaker has a lot of leeway. On the Senate, however, there are a lot more stricter guidelines, and the Senate president does assign those bills. However, and there's a little bit of leeway, but not nearly as much as on the House side. So that's an important sort of dynamic to think about as a bill begins its journey. I will say this: a lot of bills die here. So there are usually over 2,500 bills or so filed every 2-year session in the State House. 2,500 are not passed, nor are 2,500 even voted on. A lot of bills will die here. And by die, I mean they are assigned to a committee, but then the rest of this process that you will see doesn't happen. And so, or it may not happen the first year, it may happen later in the second year of the 2-year session. So you'll see bills obviously filed again after this the 2-year cycle has ended, and maybe they have a better shot, but a lot of bills die at this status. Subcommittee is next. So once it's assigned to a committee, the committee chair will assign it to a subcommittee. And a caveat, they will assign it to a subcommittee when they're ready for this bill to start moving. So it's not that a bill dies necessarily at a subcommittee level unless they want it to and they take action of such. But a lot of bills, unless it's assigned to a subcommittee, it won't move. So once it's assigned, that's a pretty good indicator that there's a desire for something to happen with this bill. So that it is assigned to a subcommittee by the chairperson, and that subcommittee will start working through its list. The subcommittee chair will set the pace of this process. They have a fair amount of leeway. At the subcommittee level, when they meet on the bill, there's a public hearing or public testimony presented. Amendments are offered up by subcommittee members. They can either take no action on it, they can adjourn debate on it, which essentially means we're done talking about this right now, and it pretty much kills the bill. Or they can pass it on to the committee after they've amended it. What's really important here to know for advocacy, this is the only opportunity for public testimony. So if you'd like to have the folks that you serve or your staff or those who are concerned about your issues speak on a bill, this is the only chance you have to show up, sign up to speak, and give that public testimony. You may be invited to speak, and if you're invited to speak, it's almost always only at the subcommittee level. Subcommittee is pretty much the only place they take testimony on a bill. There are some very few exceptions for a full committee, but that's extremely rare. The subcommittee is where you will have that opportunity. So it's really important to keep track of this part of the process on bills that you might be following. So that is that's important to kind of keep in the back of your mind as you monitor things. Bills then move on to the full committee. A subcommittee on the House and Senate side usually have about 3 members on them. A full committee will have a lot more, 10 or more folks typically on the full committee. They are automatically on the agenda if passed by the subcommittee. So this is where there's not as much discretion necessarily in the process. Once you are on a subcommittee agenda, you are now sort of in an area where rules really matter. And so if it passes the subcommittee, it's going to go on the full committee's agenda. Now, when it shows up on the full committee agenda, it might be the next one, it might be a couple later, but it's ready to go at that point. The committee is the only group that debates this bill. Like I said, there's no real public testimony provided at this. This is where your legislator is in charge of helping championing this bill. This is where really that handoff starts to occur. The committee debates this bill, sometimes a lot, sometimes over multiple meetings. They don't necessarily have to take action on it in that moment. They do have to dispense with the bill at some point, but they will maybe hold it over. They may, to be fair, they may take the opportunity to just not meet on the bill again. The committee chair does have that authority to sort of set the agenda, but odds are if you've made it through subcommittee and you're on a full committee agenda, your topic's going to be discussed at some point. Amendments can be offered up at this process, and eventually your bill, hopefully, is passed by the committee. Whatever version is passed out of the committee is called a committee report, and it moves to the full House. And we're going to stick on the House side, or the full Senate if adopted. So that's where this bill, your bill sort of now has its time to be debated on the floor. Then we'll move on to the House or Senate floor. So all these steps that I've said before are applicable across the board. The House and Senate operate similarly in these broad strokes. There are, of course, nuances that I won't get into today. There's a lot of, well, if they technically do this, then there's a lot of rules at play. But for today, we're going to cover the 5,000-foot view on this work. Once it comes back to that floor, your bill has passed the committee. Congratulations. You're one of the few that has gotten this far in the process. You are now on what's called second reading, which is, again, like I said, second reading means a vote. This is, for all intents and purposes, showtime for your bill, for the House or the Senate, whichever body you're in. And there's a lot to this of when things are placed on what's called the calendar for the body. That's a rundown of all the bills that are eligible for debate. Some of them may be eligible for debate only if it's placed on special order, or there's a lot of caveats on some of this. But if it's on the calendar, it's eligible for debate at some point. There's a lot of floor debate that occurs sometimes. Sometimes there's not a lot, depending on the issue at hand. But this is where you will see those videos in the news of folks debating things on the floor, asking questions between each other, people for the bill, people against the bill, and everything like that. Any member of the 124 can offer amendments at this point in the process. And they have to be, there's a lot of rules around that. They have to be germane to the bill. For instance, you can't just amend a bill to change the state's favorite color from blue to green on a bill that's about chickens like that. You can't do that. But you can offer up amendments to the bill. And then there are a lot of motions that can happen. I put three big ones on here for y'all to know. Motion to table typically occurs for amendments, but can occur for bills as well. That's essentially meaning the bill's dead. If you have an amendment or a bill and there's a motion to table it, it's done. You can also recommit bills back to committee. Let's say the debate is really potentially, especially unexpectedly vibrant debate. No one really saw this much debate coming. You may see them say, hey, let's send this back to committee and work out some of this stuff so that we don't have to spend, 3 hours today or tomorrow going through this. Let's just get the committee to go back to work on it. You can also carry it over, which is very common. That means a lot of times maybe the bill is going to have a lot of debate and they really want to clear the deck first. They want to get through a bunch of bills. So they will carry the bill over, which means, hey, we'll put this, instead of it's at the top of the list, let's put it at the bottom of the list. That might mean that we don't get to it till tomorrow, but let's get to something else first. Very common. A lot of reasons that can occur, both political, logistical, and material, but very common that occurs. At the end of this, if your bill makes it through all of that and it's time to vote, this is the moment where a roll call vote is required in both the House and the Senate. In the House, there's a big board with green for yes, red for no on all of these motions. On the motion to adopt. On the Senate, they still do it by roll call vote. So the clerk calls out every senator's name and they vote. And so you will see those votes be on the record. Folks can ask on these motions to table or recommit, or carry over, or anything like that. They can actually request a roll call vote on any action of the House. So you could see a number of roll call votes. But most of the time on the House and Senate side, some of those motions of tabling or recommit or carryover are all done by voice vote of just all the if you have an aye, say aye. If you have a nay, if you disagree, say nay. And the presiding officer determines essentially who sometimes who was louder, but who has the most number of voices part of their action. At that point, let's say your bill passes, congratulations, you've made it pretty far on either the House or Senate side. You will have what's called third reading. Typically is 24 hours later on the next legislative day. Typically, it is the final vote. It is usually done in both bodies by voice vote. Again, just all those in favor say aye, all those opposed nay. The ayes have it, and you're done. It's sort of a final vote on hey, that second reading had all of these amendments on it. We approved all those amendments. We approved the amended version of the bill, but hey, here's the clean version based on everything we just said. It's it's reprinted in their calendar. It has the full updated text to it. Here's the clean version. Is everyone good with this last version? And the answer hopefully is yes. And very rarely, or I mean, maybe not too rarely, but uncommonly, there are motions to allow for third reading amendments. Let's say it's a really big topic. You'll see this with some of the larger bills being tackled, but there are so many things that have to be done on second reading, but there's a clock issue, meaning like there's a date certain that something has to happen by. You will see them maybe say, hey, we're at a good place here on third reading. We'd like to offer up more amendments. Maybe they're cleanup amendments. Maybe there's one outlying thing that needs to be addressed. So they will allow that to happen. So sometimes you will see that. Sometimes you will also see motions to have a roll call vote at third reading, particularly on issues some may find divisive or where there's a lot of debate going on. You'll see some members ask for a roll call vote on third reading to get votes on the record as well. So that's how that all works. Let's say your bill passes. Congratulations. You're not done yet. Like I said, you started in the House with this bill. Once you do all of those steps, you get through third reading on the House. It's like Monopoly. You pass go, but you start over again. You go to the Senate. This is a two-way street. So the House, if a bill passes the House, it will go to the Senate. If it passes the Senate first, it'll go to the House. The third reading version, whatever passes on third reading, is what goes to the other chamber. And you start all over again. So if you go from House to Senate, that means it gets introduced by the Senate clerk. It gets assigned to a committee. It gets then assigned to a subcommittee. Subcommittee has their public hearing. So that's your second chance at public testimony and public comment on the bill. It moves then to your full committee and then back to the Senate floor for second reading, all those amendments, and your third reading. So you start all over again. And so these bills can take 2 years to pass at times. You throw in the amount of discretion that various committees may have on when things pass, your clock can get really long. What's important to note is just because it passed one body does not mean the other body has to take action. I mentioned that once you pass a subcommittee, there's a little bit of an expectation of, okay, this thing has a chance of at least getting to the floor. That's not guaranteed. Even if you pass the House, that the Senate has to deal with that bill. It's only if the Senate wants to deal with that bill or if the House wants to deal with a Senate bill. They don't necessarily have to. There's a fair amount of coordination, particularly among party lines of, hey, what priorities does our platform have? And so these need to move. There's a lot of that. But if your bill is not one of those, that's a whole other dynamic. Now you have to go to the Senate and convince them to take action, just like you did at the House. If by some hopefully your bill is agreeable to all. If your bill that passed the House goes through all of that in the Senate and it goes through it unchanged at all, like not even no sentence changed all the way through the Senate, that means your House version and your Senate version are the same. So if they're the same, then that goes automatically to the governor's desk for their for their action, which we'll get to next. If there's disagreement, if a sentence is changed or whole sections are changed or the bill entirely is different from the House and the Senate, technically there's a couple little steps that occur, but what you need to be ready for is a conference committee. 3 House members, 3 senators get together in a room and they work out the differences in your bill. If your bill is we want a $10 grant and the favorite color is red, but they change it to $8 and red, you agreed on red, but you didn't agree on the money, so you have to figure out a compromise between $8 and $10. Maybe you'll compromise at 9, or you can take 8, or you can take 10. So you'll see that happen a fair amount, particularly in the budget world. There is a conference committee, and so they hash out those differences. At that point, when those differences are, they find an amenable version in the middle, they will then take those back to both of their bodies, House and Senate. So you're still not done yet. You thought you were done with votes. You're not. That conference committee report, that compromise, is then considered by the full House and the full Senate. You don't have to do committees and stuff again. You get a single vote on the conference committee report, and then so that everyone agrees to the same bill. A bill does not reach the governor's desk unless both the House and the Senate have agreed to it in full. And so how do you get to that is through a conference committee. If it's adopted by both, if that conference committee report is adopted, or you have the same bill, they both agree to your original version, that's then ratified, which means it's on its way to the governor's desk to be signed into law and become an act of law by the governor. The governor doesn't have a ton of authority in South Carolina, but he has this one, and it's pretty important. He can agree to something. He signs it into law. He or she signs it into law, and it becomes law. However, if they disagree with it, they can veto it. And that means this is not. I don't agree with this. This should not become law. I send this back to you guys with my message on veto, and he will say, "Hey, I'll have a veto message on why they have vetoed this bill." That triggers a different process. So that's how a bill becomes a law. And then, however, if the governor says no, here's what happens. You go back to your House first. Every governor veto goes to the House first. The House takes a vote on that veto. They either sustain the veto, which means they agree with the governor, which keeps the veto in place, at which point the bill is done, or they vote to override the governor's veto. A 2/3 majority is required at this level of the House. I mentioned that the current House of Representatives has a supermajority in the Republican Party to override vetoes if need be. And if the House votes to override, it goes to the Senate. The Senate then does the same thing. They vote to sustain, which means agree with the governor. If the Senate votes to sustain, you're done. The bill's dead. If the Senate votes to override, a 2/3 majority is required. The veto then becomes overridden and has to become law at that point. What's important here to note is both bodies have to vote to override. If one of them votes to sustain, it's done. If the House votes to sustain, the Senate never even gets it. And so both bodies have to agree to this. They both have to achieve the 2/3 majority to do so, at which point the governor's veto is overridden and it becomes law. That is how your bill becomes law in South Carolina over the course of 2 years, potentially up to 2 years in a legislative in a cycle at our House, Senate, and governor, and the role that they play in all of them. What I'd like for y'all to think about for a minute, and maybe feel free to throw some in the chat if you'd like. And if you have any questions, feel free to throw those in. I've got a couple more things to cover, and then we'll open it up for questions in about 6 or 8 minutes, probably. But this is an activity we like to do when we do this training in person, especially, is to think through. These are all of the steps that we just went through. When you're thinking about what you can do to take action to help your issue move the needle on your issue, whether that's for something or maybe even against something, there's advocacy you can do at every single level. Now, some of these are harder or require a lot more capital, political, reputational, relational, all that type, or money. But there is advocacy you can do at every level. And so, what I like for organizations to think through is, okay, well, what can we do? And you don't have to do anything sometimes if you don't have the capacity to do it. But if you're introducing a bill, what is something we can do if there's an issue we're passionate about to get a bill filed? Or if we see something that's been introduced that may be detrimental to our work, what is something we can do to, as if we see something introduced? And I'll walk through a couple of, very easy examples on some of these. If you're doing a bill introduction, you can help someone write the bill. If you're against something, you can help find legislators to flag it and say, hey, Mr. Chairman of this committee, this is going to really, really hurtful to the work that we're doing. Can we have a conversation about it? Because again, committee chairmen have a lot of leeway on when things are scheduled or if they get scheduled at all. Subcommittee meetings, I mentioned that's the only opportunity you have for public testimony. So signing up to speak for or against something is an obvious one. But there's also outreach. The subcommittees usually have 3 or 4 members in them. That's a lot easier to manage than a full committee of 10 or 20 or 124 House members. So if you can get action implemented at the subcommittee level, you're dealing with a smaller number of legislators on a specific topic. You have a chance to speak. It's a great opportunity to move the needle if you can. The full committee, again, 20 is smaller than 124. Reaching out to those committee members on, hey, this bill is great. Hey, this bill may hurt, and getting your folks in front of their members who are on that committee before that meeting happens, or packing the room as well. All of these meetings are open to the public and have public seating, are all strategies there. Once you get to voting and you get on the House floor, there's a lot of showing up to the state house with there is power in numbers a lot of times, particularly at that stage. Showing up to the state house for or against something, contacting this is an opportunity where if your House member or senator has not been on those committees, to engage them and say, hey, this is coming your way. Here's what questions I'd like for you to ask on the floor. Here's maybe an amendment you can offer. Those are all ways you can help impact that second reading vote. The third reading is a little bit more difficult because many times it's perfunctory. It's, hey, we did all this work on second reading, but it could be additional questions asked. It could be, hey, let's move this fast. We need to get this done by tomorrow so that the Senate can take it. There's some things you can do there on pace. Once you move between the chambers, there's advocacy, of course, there as well. Now you've got to introduce the House member or the Senate members into this issue. What happened on the other side of the state house with your issue, and start that process over again. Then, of course, the governor's office. It's statewide. All of us are constituents, and so there is a volume potentially there that could help if you're able to build relationships with staff in the governor's office or legislators that have a strong relationship with the governor. Those are some areas as well that you can go in. So it's helpful to think through, what can I do? There is something that can be done at every stage of this process. Some of them are a little bit more challenging if you're new to this work. Or if you haven't been in it as long, or if new faces change, you have to start building those relationships again. But there is something that can be done at every level. There's 3 tips that I want y'all to leave with today before we go to any questions. First, rules matter. What I just went through is the basic version. Now, all bills have those elements happen to them. However, there are a lot of rules that impact the process, pace of legislation in South Carolina. Rules are extremely important because they are tools as well. They are increasingly being used as well as tools to advance or stop legislative efforts. Various motions on the floor, in particular during that second reading debate, become extremely important. The rules rules really do matter. Rules are not necessarily just motions to do different things, but it's also timetables when things have to be done by a certain date. Easiest one to think about is the budget has to pass by June 30th. So that's a pretty hard deadline for if you've got a budgetary priority and they're not done with the budget on June 29th, there's a pretty high stakes debate that needs to occur before the next day. So rules really matter. What we gave you today are the very basics. And our recommendation to learn more about those rules is to pick something and follow it. If you were on yesterday's being an effective advocate training, you learned that part of pick something and follow it, and you'll learn some other rules along the way. Number two, relationships matter. So it seems like a no-brainer, but why it's really important in the legislative process is we only have one shot at the subcommittee level to provide that public testimony for you to express your take on the legislation and the work, the impact it may have on your mission, and you be able to voice that personally. That only occurs really at the subcommittee level. Yes, you can do, editorials, you can do some press, you can do some things like that, but in terms of the formal process, that's it. Once you hit the committee level, and especially the floor level, your legislator is the one that is going to have the ability, the actual authority to stand up and ask a question or to make a motion. So relationships matter, because if something happens on the floor that you didn't expect, having that relationship is important to help navigate that and give your opinion on how that goes. And then three, coalitions work. We've seen this with our own members of groups of folks that have similar legislative priorities around some topics like housing or healthcare or arts and culture. Coalitions around that do work, because you're able to spread some of that burden of understanding the rules and having those relationships across your peers. And that can be really healthy and help you balance your own resources, but also can help move the needle because you're touching a lot more legislators with that work. There are a lot of tools and resources on our State House website. I could list a lot of other tools out there potentially, but I think this is the most important one for you to know. Our State House website, while it's not necessarily the most user-friendly, it's fairly cumbersome. It is very robust. There is a lot there that you can dig into. I know in the chat, I think Ben was talking about the calendar and journals. Those, I didn't even list those here, but those are vital. You can track when bills are introduced. You can go in and see every bill that's been introduced every day of the legislative cycle. You can see the meeting schedule. There's links to all of those agendas, and nearly every meeting at the State House is live streamed as well. So you can watch those, or you can watch the recordings of them. They're all archived on their website. The State House also has its own legislative tracking software that you can create a free account, and you can track bill numbers, and it will alert you when something has happened to that bill. It doesn't really do proactive of, hey, it's been scheduled for debate, but it will tell you someone was sponsored it, the committee voted on it and it passed, or what have you. You can also follow committees. And so you will know when those committees do meet. They'll send you an email, and it'll tell you the House Education Committee is meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. Here's a link to the agenda, and you can follow things that way. The legislature also has an app, which is linked on their homepage. That's great on the go. You can tune into live streams. You can track bills. It'll send you little alerts on your phone. It'll send you alert when they go into sessions. If they gavelled in at 12 o'clock, it'll say, hey, session has started, or it'll tell you when session has ended. A lot of things are on the app as well. We highly recommend you downloading that ahead of the legislative cycle starting in January this year. So I encourage you to explore the statehouse.gov website, scstatehouse.gov, and really learn more. You'll find your legislators there. You'll find those calendars of what they're going to talk about every day when they're in session. The journals, which is essentially the minutes, is really great as well. If you kind of miss the day or you want to figure out what exactly they talked about, those are published. A lot of information is there. And with that, I want to thank you all for being here today to learn more about the legislative process in South Carolina. Want to open the door, stop